welcome. My name is Marilyn Ribadenera Lewicki. I'm an LTA at the Greenwich Library, and welcome to Date with the Author, Hispanic Heritage Month edition, a virtual component of our Authors Live series. My guest today is Melissa Rivero, the author of The Affairs of the Falcóns, which won the 2019 New American Voices Award, a 2020 International Latino Book Award, and was also longlisted for the Hemingway Debut Novel Prize, the Center for Fiction's first novel prize, and an Aspen Words Literary Prize. Hello, Melissa.
Hi.
Thanks so much for taking time to talk with me today. For anyone who hasn't had the pleasure of reading your book, can you please give us an idea what the book is about?
Yes, my book is about a young Peruvian mother who lives in New York City. She's undocumented, and she's just trying to keep her family afloat here in the States. The story takes place in the early 90s. My protagonist's name is Anna, and she has 2 children and her husband.
Sounds great. Your characters are fantastic. They are relatable and fully capture the Latinx culture in both the US and each character's country of origin. What inspired you to shine light onto the plight of immigrants in the US?
So when I set out to write the book, well, first I didn't even know I was writing a book. And I didn't necessarily write it with any sort of theme in mind. I started off writing a particular scene in a novel that takes place towards the later part of the novel. And that was the first scene that I wrote, and it was an incident that was inspired by something that happened to my mother. And then from there, I just was so curious about Anna, my protagonist, and the people that were in her life, who I got to know as I started writing. So the more I wrote, the more I started to get to know Anna, her family, the community. And then these issues are just, they're just part of what one has to deal with as an immigrant and as an undocumented immigrant. So those things just sort of came up naturally as the story came up through my writing of it.
Sounds good. Which leads to my next question. Who inspired you for your main character, Anna?
So Anna was, that particular first scene that I wrote was inspired by something that happened to my mom. And it was an incident that she had recounted to me many times over the course of my life. And one day I remember like sitting at my desk and just thinking, well, I wonder what it would have felt like to have been her in that situation. And so I just imagined it and started to write the scene. And so in many ways, I think Anna was inspired by my mother, but she is not my mother, and the way, and let me tell you, as I was writing the novel, there were times where I was just like typing and it was like, Anna, what are you doing? And I don't think that my mother would have necessarily reacted the way that she did, that Anna does to things, or have made the choices that Anna made for certain things. But really, I think that Anna is an amalgamation of some very strong women in my life who have influenced me, my mother being one of them. But yeah.
It sounds great. Speaking of writing about topics that are taboo in Latinx culture, even in the 21st century, was it your intention to raise awareness on these topics?
No. Again, I mean, I didn't go into it with any sort of agenda, or trying to sort of highlight any particular issue. I do think, though, that writing and the act of writing fiction is a political act in many ways, right? I think that a lot of the things that we care about will make themselves evident on the page for me, I just sort of like went with my intuition on what I thought that this character would want to do under the circumstances that I was putting her through, or putting her in rather. And when these choices and these obstacles were put in front of her, I thought, well, you know, what what would she do under these circumstances, right? There are avenues that are available to her that are controversial and that do we don't talk about, or folks would rather not address openly. And I felt like that was just like a natural part of how she would react to things too, in terms of like how she made those choices and how she went about, you know, doing the things that she did, kind of like sort of secretive. Because and you know what, in some ways I can see those are intimate things, right, that you may not necessarily want others to know, and that's okay too. But again, I didn't go out sort of trying to make a statement like saying I'm going to write a scene this way to make this point. It's just I followed the characters, and I think very much that, you know, a lot of undocumented women face these kinds of issues. We may not talk about them, but they do happen, and we do need to. I would like for this to start the conversation to maybe make it easier for folks to talk about and not have it be so taboo.
Great. um, Betty's character is particularly interesting because she's Anna's confidant, and even after many years of friendship, there are things Anna didn't know about Betty. Can you tell us a little bit about their friendship and what developed and how that developed while writing?
I met Betty. It was like the second chapter that I wrote, after writing like that first with that scene that happened, when I decided to like, oh, I wonder where Anna works. Oh, Anna works in a factory, and that's kind of where I met Betty, right? Like, and I know it's weird to say that like as a writer, but like you go into the story and like you come across like the characters, right? And I found her. I just found her to be very fun to write. Like Anna, she has her secrets, and we don't always tell our besties everything, right? And I think that part of being a best friend or a good friend is knowing that that you can trust people, your friends, with your secrets, and you can also trust that you don't have to divulge all of your secrets to them. They'll respect your boundaries, right? And even though they grew up together, they knew each other, there were just some things that Betty didn't feel comfortable sharing with Anna. And I think that that is, I honestly thought that that was a very tender thing about their relationship. Um, that there were moments where she was willing to be vulnerable. And maybe that I mean, I hope that that would also inspire Anna to be vulnerable, you know, because, you know, we always, especially as well, for me as an immigrant, but also as, you know, children of immigrants, we kind of always have to put on this hard shell. I mean, this, you know, being in a new country, a new environment, the circumstances that you're trying to navigate, they do sometimes your armor, you put on this armor, right? And sometimes it's hard to take that armor off. And I think that that friendship, it was very telling when they were willing to take pieces of the armor off. You know, it wasn't you know, just a given because they knew each other, right?
Yeah, I found it fascinating. Thank you for explaining that. Now, also, Valeria's character also stood out to me because I wanted to think, oh, this character is just bitter and not just a terrible person. What was your intention in creating such a dislikable character?
Listen, full disclosure, she's probably one of my favorite characters to write. She was just fun to write. I enjoyed writing her, not because I have a lot of sympathy for her. I mean, there were times that she did really terrible things, but I do think postpartum depression is ignored. Um, I think that women are often villainized, and not and sort of just like expected to behave in a certain way without sort of people trying to understand why they're behaving the way they are and just kind of like dismissing them. She did, I mean, don't get me wrong, she did like some pretty bad things, but I do sometimes wonder if maybe, you know, maybe Anna had her own guard up too much with her, you know, maybe if she had reached out in a compassionate way, if maybe she understood a little more the burden that she was putting on Valeria's family by living with her, and how hard that can be sometimes, right? When you're living with another family, and how that could also create tension in that marriage, right? So, I mean, and that's maybe me playing a little bit of a devil's advocate when people are like, "Oh, Valeria's so horrible," but yeah, I enjoyed writing her, and I do think that there are folks, you know, even within the immigrant community, that like folks with green cards, folks with citizenship, they do have the upper hand over those that don't have that status. And there can be ways to take advantage of that difference in status. So that I did want to, that was intentional, that I did want to make sure that was highlighted there, because it's a common thing that happens in these in our communities.
Did you intend on ending the story as a cliffhanger? And did you have an alternate ending in mind?
No, I knew how it was going to end very early on. No, it wasn't. I was never intended to be a cliffhanger. And it's funny, I get a lot of folks who ask me, well, what happens next? Is there a sequel, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is some stories just never really end, right? I, you know, this wasn't, it was never, I don't want to give it away, but like, you know, you can't always expect to have a certain type of ending, I guess, as a reader, right? And I think we're sometimes conditioned to expect certain kinds of endings. But for this particular one, I kind of always knew, because and it's funny because I've talked to some immigration lawyers who are always like, yeah, I knew. You know, like to them it's like not a surprise that it went kind of the way it did. Yeah, I probably am giving it all away, but
Thank you. If you could direct the movie adaptation of your novel, what actors do you envision giving life to your characters?
that is a hard one because there aren't very many Peruvian American actors. If I can't even think of one. I jokingly say Scarlett Johansson, because we all know her reputation for taking roles of minorities. No, but in all seriousness, I don't know. I can't. I know that maybe what's his name? Oscar Isaac. I think I would like to play Lucho's character, but I can't think of who I would want to play Anna. Yeah.
Thank you. What inspired you to write a story like this one?
I find that I'm like a lot of fiction writers, like I'm very character driven. The plot kind of comes along as I get to know my characters. So with this one incident that happened to my mom, that's how I'm just imagined, well, I wonder what she would have felt like, right? And I sort of put myself in that place as a writer. That's where Anna came, and the world's built around her in that sense.
What author do you feel you are most influenced by in your writing, and what other authors do you follow?
I really love Cristina Garcia. She's been one of my favorites for forever. When I read Dreaming in Cuban, that was probably the first time I actually felt a connection to. I saw myself in that. I know some people say Sandra Cisneros, or you know, I mean, I couldn't like necessarily connect to her work that way. But certainly Cristina Garcia was one person who I did connect with. Some Peruvian writers as well. Mario Vargas Llosa, his work I really do love. And some more contemporary stuff. Claudia Salazar Jimenez wrote a book called Blood of the Dawn. It's recent. It's only a few years old. Might have actually come out in 2018. So it's a relatively new book. But it's a book that I feel like I could go back to and reread and just get so much, both from a story perspective, but also just like as a writer, in terms of structure, pacing, the real rawness of the way she tells the story of her characters. I just find it to be incredible.
Thank you. What genre and or trend would you like to see more from Latinx writers?
Genre or trend? I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't know if there's any particular trend I would want them to. I mean, I think that writers should just write what they feel called to write. So yeah, it's a tough question. I don't know. Yeah, sorry, I can't answer that question.
That's okay. Thank you. What books are on your reading list?
So right now, I've got a sneak peek at Katie Gutierrez's novel, which is coming out next year, More Than You'll Ever Know. So far, it's about a woman who is a bigamist, and I believe one of her husband dies, and it's very interesting. So I'm reading that. So I'm just looking at like my bookshelves. I have We Were Never Here on that's up next. That's by Andrea Bartz. She's a friend of mine, and she's just a lovely person, and they're really fun. Can you say fun with a thriller? It's a thriller, but it is fun. Like thrillers are entertaining, and sometimes I need to just get out of like the heady, space. Oh, and by that I mean like, I have a day job where I read and write contracts all day long, and sometimes I just need to, get out of that sort of very rudimentary space and find something entertaining. So I'm looking forward to reading that as well.
Great. What is your writing routine?
So that will depend on my kids for the most part. So before the pandemic, I would drop them off at school and write in the subway, like on my commute to work. And then and on the weekends, like in coffee shops. My husband has always been like my number one cheerleader, just like super supportive, will do whatever. If I say I need writing time, he will make it so that I have my writing time. And so I would write for a couple of hours on the weekends at coffee shops. I would have a writing date with my writing group about once a month. During the pandemic, during the pandemic when the kids were not in school, I would write in the mornings before their virtual classes started for like half an hour. Now that they're back, I do that. I drop them off. I will write for half an hour, and then I'll go and log into my day job. I don't have, unfortunately, the ability to really go to coffee shops even. I mean, I could, but because my children are not vaccinated, and my grandmother's 102 and I want to see her, like I don't feel necessarily comfortable being indoors and unmasked. So I'll go to the park sometimes and I'll handwrite. So I typically handwrite some first drafts, and then I'll type them up. But I mean, it's as long as I can find 30 minutes a day to write, that's all I really care about, and that's really all I have time for, just 30 minutes a day. So and I know some and it's not for everyone, right? A lot of writers can't write every day, and some writers like to have like large blocks of time, and then they won't write for several days. But for me, because I have so many things pulling at me, I kind of just need to find those 30 minutes. And then if that's all I got, then I got to make the best of it. Right. So, yeah.
That sounds great. Lastly, what advice would you give to people that want to start writing a novel, but just don't know how to start or where to begin?
I would say journal. I would say journal. It helps to get whatever things are on your mind out of your mind and just like onto a page. And that kind of, in many ways, I feel like that almost opens up the pathway for ideas to flow. It's almost like you're unclogging a pipe by doing that, by journaling, and ideas will kind of flow through. And if you're stuck on what to write, do some writing prompts. Oftentimes you'll find that there will be one, you get to practice, right? Writing, creating stories, but you may come across something that really resonates with you and that you'll want to explore more. I mean, it just so happens that like this one story that my mother told me sort of sat with me, and I thought, oh, let me just like put it on the page and see what happens. And it was enough of an inducement to keep me coming back, right? And so that's the other thing. Once you find something that you're like, oh, I need to get to know this character better, or I need to know what happens in the story. Once you're intrigued and you want to know more, I mean, that will obviously be appealing to readers, but you'll also find that more ideas will come to you. It's just like you're opening up like information and inspiration to come through. But I think you should start with, like, if you're stuck, start with just writing and journaling and doing some writing prompts. I think that helps. Also, it helps to have other writers in your ambit. So find your community. I don't have an MFA. I didn't study creative writing in college either. So I had to really find my people, and I'm very, very grateful to have a very supportive and robust community of writers now.
Wow, that's really great advice. Thank you. Well, Melissa, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you and about your book. It's awesome. I really enjoyed it. Once again, the book is called The Affairs of the Falcóns. It's published by HarperCollins, and you can check it out here at the Greenwich Library and at your local bookstore like Diane's Books.
Oh, actually, yes, since you mentioned it, this is the paperback, in case, because they did a different cover for the paperback, and it is available in Spanish in case you want someone who, tu tia, tu mami, whatever, like, to also read it. I've had folks who, have read the English version, and they've also given like the Spanish to like their parent or something, and they've read it together, which is nice.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm definitely going to check out the Spanish version as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Melissa.
Thank you.
All right.